The first thing I saw wasn't the dam. It was the water. Still. Dark. Spread out across land that had never held water longer than a storm. My truck stopped before I told it to. Engine running. Hand steady on the wheel. 18 acres. Gone. I stepped out slowly, boots hitting gravel, and walked up to the ridge line where my grandfather used to stand every spring. Only now, the valley wasn't a valley anymore. It was a reservoir. Controlled. Contained. Engineered. At the center of it, a raised earth wall cut across the land like it had always been there. A spillway pipe pushed water through at a steady, controlled flow. And nailed into a wooden post beside it. Community Water Retention Project, HOA authorized. I heard footsteps behind me. Impressive, right? The HOA president said, climbing up the embankment with a clipboard in her hand. Calm. Confident. Like she was showing off something she owned. I didn't answer. She didn't wait. You were gone. The community needed this. We followed procedure. Then she looked at the water, then back at me. You should have read your covenants before you left. This land serves more people now. I kept looking at the waterline. Not at her. Not at the dam. At something just barely visible beneath the surface, a wooden post, tilted slightly, like it didn't belong underwater. I took a photo. Then another. Then one more. Because if this dam was legal, why was that boundary marker underwater? If you've ever seen someone hide power behind paperwork, you already know this doesn't end clean. But this one didn't go the way they expected. Stay with me, and tell me this, what would you do if someone turned your land into a lake while you were gone? I didn't buy the land. I inherited it. 62 acres in a narrow valley just outside a growing development zone, passed down from my grandfather, who used to say the land didn't need much, just respect and time. He ran cattle there for 30 years. Before that, his father used it the same way. No subdivisions. No fences cutting it into pieces. Just open ground, a natural drainage channel, and a low basin that only filled during heavy storms. I knew every slope of that valley. Every rise. Every line where water should go, and where it never stayed. That's why what I was looking at now didn't make sense. Before my last deployment, the land was quiet. On the far ridge, construction had started, an upscale HOA community pushing outward. New homes. Clean streets. Controlled landscaping. The kind of place that looked organized from the outside, but ran on strict rules underneath. At first, they kept their distance. Then came the letters. Polite at first. Notices about regional drainage improvements. Mentions of future retention planning. Nothing direct. Nothing aggressive. Just enough to signal that something was coming. By the time I deployed, the tone had shifted. Certified mail. Formal language. References to community-wide water management initiatives. They weren't asking for permission, they were building a case for authority. I responded when I could. Short, precise replies. Requests for clarification. Documentation. Nothing emotional. Then communication stopped. Deployment doesn't leave room for chasing paperwork. You answer what you can. The rest waits. Or at least, it's supposed to. When I got back, one of the neighboring landowners met me near the access road. Older guy. Been there longer than the HOA. He didn't waste time. They started moving earth while you were gone, he said. Brought in equipment, cut into the basin. Said it was approved. I asked him one thing. Approved by who? He shook his head slowly. Didn't say. Just kept working. I looked past him, toward the ridge, toward the water that wasn't supposed to be there. Because if they really had approval, why did it look like they built it like no one was coming back? The road into the valley wasn't the same. Half a mile before the gate, the gravel had been widened, flattened by heavy equipment. Tire tracks cut deep into the dirt, pressed in layers like this hadn't been a quick job. This was weeks of work. Maybe more. I drove slower the closer I got. Not because I didn't want to see it. Because I already knew what I was going to find. When the ridge opened up, I stopped the truck. Didn't turn it off. Just sat there. The basin, my basin, was gone. In its place, a wide stretch of water pushed up against the slopes like it belonged there. The surface didn't move much. Controlled. Held in place. At the far end, the dam stood solid. Not temporary. Not improvised. Engineered. I stepped out and walked down toward it. No one stopped me. A man in a reflective vest approached halfway, holding a clipboard like he'd been expecting me. "You the owner?" he asked. I nodded once. He handed me a document before I said anything. "Just so you're aware, this is part of an emergency retention expansion approved under HOA authority." I looked at the paper. Clean formatting. Official tone. References to safety, runoff control, community protection. It read like something final. Like something already decided. Temporary easement granted for necessary infrastructure, it said. Temporary. I looked past him at the water. Then back at the dam. Nothing about it looked temporary. "Which agency approved this?" I asked. He shifted slightly. Just enough to notice. "Handled through HOA coordination with the county," he said. "Everything's in compliance." I didn't respond. Just folded the paper once and put it in my pocket. Then I started taking photos. The wall. The spillway. The waterline. The edges where land used to be visible. He watched me for a second, then handed me another sheet. "This is your assessment," he added. I glanced down. $18,400. Listed as a shared infrastructure contribution. I looked back at him. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't argue. Just asked quietly, "You're billing me for this?" He didn't answer directly. Just pointed at the document. "It applies to all affected properties." I looked past him again, across the water, across land that used to be mine. Because if this was something I was part of, why was I the one standing outside it? The first thing I did wasn't argue. It was request documents. Everything they claimed to have, permits, approvals, engineering plans, I asked for it in writing. Formal request. Timestamped. No emotion. Just process. They responded fast. Too fast. A full packet showed up within 3 days. Clean. Organized. Labeled like it had already been prepared before I asked. Community Drainage Improvement Authorization. Regional Retention Compliance Approval. Pages of signatures. Stamps. References to county codes. On the surface, it looked complete. But when I read it carefully, something felt off. Not wrong. Just broad. Every document referenced community-wide impact zones. Nothing specific to my parcel. No direct mention of my land. No coordinates tied to my boundaries. It was like they had permission. Just not for where they built it. I didn't point that out yet. Instead, I filed a request with the county clerk's office. Different tone. Different system. Slower. More precise. 2 days later, I got a call back. "There's no individual permit tied to your parcel," the clerk said. "But there is a general drainage authorization connected to the HOA development." "Does it include my land?" I asked. Pause. "No direct reference," she said. "It's broader than that." Broader. That was the word they were all using. Meanwhile, the numbers started moving. The second notice came a week later. $42,000. Same project. Same justification. Just expanded cost allocation. No explanation for the increase. Just a new total. Then came the letter from their attorney. Formal. Structured. Precise. Failure to comply would result in lien placement against the property. Deadline attached. No negotiation language. Just enforcement. I didn't respond to the letter. Instead, I went back to the land. Walked the edges. Slowly. Marked points where the water now sat, compared to where it used to drain. Then I pulled out my grandfather's old survey map. Folded. Worn. But accurate. I laid it across the hood of my truck and matched the lines to the terrain. The water didn't just fill the basin. It pushed past it. Further than it ever should have. By at least 30 feet in some places. That wasn't overflow. That was placement. I took photos of those points. Tagged them. Logged coordinates. Back at home, I overlaid everything digitally. Old boundary lines. Current water spread. The difference wasn't small. It wasn't accidental. And still, not one of their documents mentioned it. The third notice came 2 days later. Penalties added. Projected liability climbing toward $96,000. Same language. Same confidence. Same assumption that I would fall into line. But they weren't adjusting anything. Not the structure. Not the numbers. Not the claim. Because if their permit really covered everything, why didn't it say a single word about the land they flooded? The notice for the meeting came by certified mail. Mandatory community review, drainage compliance, and non-cooperative property. I didn't need to ask who that was about. The room was already full when I walked in. Rows of homeowners. Quiet conversations. A projector set up at the front. The HOA board seated like a panel, organized, prepared, confident. They weren't expecting a discussion. They were expecting a conclusion. The president stood when I entered. A quick glance. No greeting. Just acknowledgement. Good, she said. Now we can proceed. I took a seat in the back. Notebook out. Pen ready. Nothing else. The presentation started immediately. Slides showing storm runoff patterns. Flood risk zones. Before and after diagrams of the valley. Charts estimating how the new retention system protected the community uphill. My land, labeled as Zone C, Integrated Retention Basin. Not private property. Not individually owned. Integrated. Then came the numbers. Project cost allocations broken down across the community. My share highlighted. $130,000. Total projected liability including penalties, adjustments, and delayed compliance fees. A murmur moved through the room. The president turned toward me, just enough for everyone to follow her line of sight. This is what happens, she said calmly, when one property owner refuses to participate in necessary infrastructure. A few heads nodded. Someone whispered, he should have just signed. I didn't respond. Didn't interrupt. Just kept writing. They moved to the next slide. A timeline. Missed responses. Ignored notices. Failure to cooperate. Every gap in communication explained in their favor. No mention of deployment. No mention of timing. Just a narrative. Clean. Convincing. Wrong. Then came the suggestion. If the balance remains unresolved, one board member said, adjusting his glasses, we proceed with lien enforcement. From there, we have legal options for recovery, including potential sale. That landed. You could feel it shift the room. From discussion to inevitability. The president stepped forward again. We're not trying to take anything from you, she said, her voice measured. We're asking you to meet your obligation to the community. I looked up for the first time. Not at her. At the slide behind her. The one showing water coverage. Something about it didn't match what I'd seen on the ground. The edges were cleaner. Smaller. Controlled. Like they had drawn it to fit the approval, not the reality. I made a note. Circled it once. Then went back to writing. They opened the floor for comments. No one challenged them. No one asked questions. Because from the outside, they had everything. The data. The documents. The room. And the story. By the time the meeting ended, people avoided eye contact with me. Like the outcome was already decided. Like I was just delaying it. The president didn't approach me again. She didn't need to. As I walked out, one of the board members said quietly to another, "He's got nothing left." I kept walking. Didn't respond. Didn't react. Because if they really believed that, why were their maps smaller than the water I was standing in? That night, the valley was quiet. No machinery. No voices. Just the low sound of water moving through the spillway, steady, controlled, like it belonged there. I stood on the ridge alone. Same place my grandfather used to stand. Only now, the land didn't look back the same way. The water had changed everything. Not just the ground, but the way people saw it. The way they talked about it. The way they talked about me. Non-compliant. Obstruction. Liability. I'd heard worse. But this wasn't a battlefield. There was no chain of command here. No clear rules of engagement. Just paperwork, pressure, and a system designed to make you fold quietly. I thought about the meeting. How easy it would have been to speak. To push back. To correct them in front of everyone. But that's not how you win something like this. Out there, you don't react to noise. You wait for the mistake. I looked back at the waterline. At the edge where it climbed higher than it should. Then further, to where the submerged marker barely broke the surface. That detail didn't leave my head. It wasn't just out of place. It was wrong. Everything they presented, every document, every map, showed control. Precision. Compliance. But the land didn't match their version. And land doesn't lie. I felt the weight of it then. The cost. The pressure. The isolation. They had the numbers. The community. The narrative. And if I followed their pace, I'd lose. Not because they were right. Because they were faster. I exhaled slowly and let the noise drop. Stopped thinking about the fees. Stopped thinking about the meeting. Focused on one thing. That marker. Because if the water crossed that line, then this wasn't just overreach. It was misplacement. And if it was misplacement, then everything they built their case on shifted with it. I turned back toward the truck. No urgency. No frustration. Just clarity. Because the problem wasn't the dam. It was exactly where they chose to put it. And if that was wrong, then so was everything built on top of it. What if the one thing they ignored was the only thing that mattered? The notice came stamped. Final. No more adjustments. No more discussion. Just enforcement. Notice of lien filing, non-compliance. The number was printed in bold. $132,870. Total liability including penalties, legal processing, and delayed participation fees. Below it, a date. 30 days. After that, escalation. I read it once. Then again. Same language. Same confidence. Same assumption that this was already over. 2 days later, the lien was officially recorded. Public record. Anyone could see it. The shift was immediate. Calls stopped. Neighbors didn't wave anymore. Even the contractor who had been on site avoided eye contact when I drove past. To them, it wasn't a dispute anymore. It was a conclusion. The HOA moved fast after that. Survey flags appeared along the upper ridge, marking what looked like the next phase of expansion. The reservoir wasn't staying the same size. They were planning to make it bigger. More land. More water. More control. Like the outcome was guaranteed. Another letter followed. Final opportunity to resolve before enforcement action. No change in tone. No offer to negotiate. Just a reminder of what came next. Property seizure. Auction proceedings. Recovery of costs. All written like it had already been approved. I drove out to the ridge again that evening. Same view. Same water. But now, new markers in the dirt. Fresh stakes driven into ground that hadn't been touched before. They weren't waiting. They were building forward. I stood there for a long time, looking at the line where the water met the land, and then beyond it, to where the new stakes cut across terrain that had never been part of the basin. They had everything in place. The lien. The timeline. The expansion. From the outside, it looked complete. Like there was no path left to stop it. No leverage. No authority higher than what they already claimed. Because if they were so sure they'd won, why were they already preparing to take even more? I stopped looking at their documents. Started looking at mine. Not the ones they sent, the ones that had been there long before any of this started. Old surveys. Archived plats. Elevation records. The kind of paperwork most people never open, because nothing ever changes. Until it does. I went back to the county office in person this time. Different desk. Different clerk. I didn't ask about the dam. I asked about the land. Do you have the original grading and elevation file for parcel 17B? I said. She typed for a few seconds, then paused. That one goes back a while, she said. You sure that's the one you need? I nodded. She disappeared into the back. Came back with a folder that didn't look like it had been touched in years. Dust along the edges. Paper slightly yellowed. I opened it right there. The map inside didn't match what the HOA had been showing. Not completely. The basin was there. The drainage path was there. But something else was marked, something newer maps didn't include. A line cutting across the lower section of the property. Labeled. Faint, but still clear. Federal drainage easement, restricted flow alteration zone. I didn't react. Just studied it. Followed the line with my finger. It ran straight through the area where the dam now stood. And extended outward, into the exact section of land they were preparing to expand into next. I looked back up at the clerk. When was this last updated? I asked. She checked the record. Never removed, she said. Just, not referenced much anymore. Not referenced. I closed the folder slowly. Because if that line was still active, then the problem wasn't what they built. It was where they built it. And if that easement still had authority, then who had they just built against? It wasn't something you announce right away. Not if you wanted to hold. I didn't call the HOA. Didn't send a letter. Didn't argue. I verified it. Twice. Back home, I scanned the easement map and overlaid it with everything I had collected over the past weeks, current satellite imagery, my grandfather's survey, the photos I took from the ridge, the coordinates I logged along the waterline. Layer by layer, the picture stopped being a suspicion and started becoming exact. The dam wasn't near the easement. It wasn't adjacent to it. It was sitting directly inside it. Worse than that, the spillway, the one controlling the entire water level, cut straight across the restricted flow line. Which meant the problem wasn't just placement. It was control. They hadn't just built on protected ground. They had altered the way water moved through a federally protected drainage path. I didn't assume anything. I called Base Legal. Gave them the parcel ID, the easement reference, the current structure details. They didn't respond immediately. But when they did, the tone had changed. Send us everything, they said. I did. Photos, maps, notices, HOA documents, county responses, everything. Then I waited. Not long. 2 days later, I got a second call, this time with someone else on the line. Different department. Federal. They didn't ask about the HOA. They asked about the structure. Is the dam actively controlling water retention? Yes. Has flow direction been altered from natural grading? Yes. Is there any federal review or permit attached to this structure? Not that I've been given. There was a pause. Short. Measured. Then one sentence. That structure shouldn't exist there. No emotion. No exaggeration. Just fact. They requested coordinates. Exact placement. I gave it to them. Within hours, the response chain started moving. County office called first. Different tone than before. Can you confirm the location of the structure relative to the easement? The clerk asked. I sent them the overlay. No argument came back. Just silence, then a quiet, we'll review this immediately. Then the HOA reached out. First time they initiated contact since the lien. Short email. Requesting clarification regarding recent inquiries involving your property. No mention of the dam. No mention of the easement. Just caution. I didn't respond. Because by that point, it wasn't my conversation anymore. It had moved past them. The next call came from the same federal contact. We've notified the county, he said. They'll be conducting a site inspection. What does that mean for the structure? I asked. Another pause. It means if your documentation is accurate, they're going to have a problem explaining it. That was the first time the weight of it shifted. Not emotionally. Structurally. Because everything the HOA had built their authority on, every letter, every fee, every claim, was based on one assumption. That they had the right to control that land. But the easement didn't just restrict use. It restricted interference. And what they built wasn't passive. It was active control over water movement. Which meant it didn't matter how clean their paperwork looked. If it ignored that one line, it didn't hold. The county scheduled the inspection for the end of the week. Word spread faster than any letter they had sent. Contractors stopped showing up. The new survey stakes for expansion stayed untouched. Even the HOA board went quiet. No new notices. No follow-ups. Just silence. Because they had started to realize something. Not all authority sits at the same level. And they had built their entire project under one system. Without checking the one above it. I drove out to the ridge again the morning before the inspection. Same water. Same dam. But it didn't feel the same anymore. Not permanent. Not controlled. Just temporary. Like something waiting to be corrected. I walked down to the edge of the waterline. The marker was still there. Now easier to see in the morning light. Tilted slightly, but exactly where it had always been. Exactly where the easement line ran. I took one more photo. Not because I needed it. Because it marked the moment everything shifted. From defense to exposure. Because when the inspection happened, they weren't going to be asking whether the dam was useful or whether the community benefited. They were going to be asking one thing. Why it was built in a place no one had permission to touch. And once that question was asked in front of everyone, there was no document they could use to answer it. The inspection wasn't quiet. It couldn't be. By the time I got there, half the community was already standing along the ridge. Not close enough to interfere, but close enough to watch. The same people who sat in that meeting. The same ones who nodded when the numbers went up. Only now, no one was talking. 2 county vehicles were parked near the access road. And one unmarked SUV. That was the one everyone kept looking at. The HOA board arrived together. Organized. Composed. The president stepped out first, holding a folder thicker than anything she'd shown at the meeting. Still confident. Just quieter. The county inspector started with routine questions. Structure dimensions. Build timeline. Authorization chain. The HOA answered quickly. We operated under Community Drainage Authority. County-aligned compliance. Emergency mitigation framework. Same language. Same structure. Clean. Until the federal representative stepped forward. No introduction. No presentation. Just a map. He unfolded it on the hood of a county truck. Anchored the corners with his hands. Before we continue, he said, calm, direct, we need to establish location. The inspector leaned in. So did the HOA president. So did everyone within earshot. The representative traced a line across the map with one finger. Federal drainage easement, he said. Active. Enforced. Then he shifted his hand slightly and tapped the center of the marked area. Your structure is here. No reaction at first. Just stillness. The HOA president stepped closer, scanning the map like she expected it to change if she looked long enough. That's not consistent with our survey, she said. The representative didn't argue. He reached into a folder, pulled out another map. Placed it beside hers. Same land. Different detail. More precise. Older. Authoritative. This is the recorded easement boundary, he said. It has not been removed. The county inspector straightened slightly. Looked from one map to the other. Then back at the dam in the distance. How far into the easement does the structure extend? He asked. The representative didn't hesitate. Primary wall, fully inside. Spillway, crosses the restricted flow line. That landed. Hard. The inspector turned to the HOA board. Was federal review requested prior to construction? No one answered immediately. The president opened her folder, flipped pages, slower now. We followed all required county procedures, she said finally. That's not what I asked, the inspector replied. Silence again. Behind them, someone in the crowd shifted. A quiet ripple of movement passed through the watchers. Because the tone had changed. Not aggressive. Just final. The representative stepped forward again. This isn't a documentation issue, he said. It's a compliance issue. The structure alters controlled drainage within a protected easement. That requires federal authorization. He let that sit for a second. Then added. Which was not obtained. The inspector exhaled slowly. Looked back at the dam. Then down at the maps. Then at the HOA board. We're going to need to halt operation of this structure pending full review, he said. That's when the shift happened. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just visible. The confidence left their posture. The certainty in their answers disappeared. Because for the first time, they weren't leading the conversation. They were reacting to it. The president tried once more. This system protects over 40 homes, she said. Immediate removal could create risk. The representative nodded slightly. Then it should have been placed where it was allowed, he replied. No edge. No emotion. Just fact. The inspector turned toward me then. First time since the process started. Are you the reporting property owner? He asked. Yes. He nodded once. Do you have documentation of pre-construction conditions? I handed him the folder. Photos. Surveys. Waterline comparisons. Everything. He flipped through it quickly. Paused on one image. The marker. Half submerged. Then looked back toward the dam. That was enough. He closed the folder. Turned back to the board. We'll be issuing an immediate notice of noncompliance, he said, and recommending structural adjustment to restore original flow conditions. No argument came back. Because there wasn't one left to make. The numbers started coming out after that. Quietly. Between officials. Removal cost estimates. Restoration requirements. Potential penalties. All spoken low, but not low enough to hide. The crowd heard enough. And the same people who had sat in that meeting now weren't looking at me. They were looking at the board. Waiting. Watching. The president didn't speak again. Didn't try to recover it. Because there was nothing left to control. I stepped forward once. Not to argue. Not to press. Just to be heard clearly. I looked at her. Then at the dam. Then back at the map. And said, "You didn't build a dam on my land." A pause. Long enough for everyone to listen. "You built it in a place you were never allowed to touch." No one responded. Because there wasn't anything left to say. The inspector began packing up. The representative folded the maps. The conversation moved past the HOA entirely. And as the officials walked back toward their vehicles, the only question left wasn't whether the structure would stay. It was how much it was going to cost them to fix it. Cliffhanger line. Because stopping the dam was one thing, but undoing what it had already done was something else entirely. The order came faster than anyone expected. Not weeks. Not months. Days. A formal notice was issued, county-backed, federally supported. Immediate action required. The dam wasn't just under review anymore. It was non-compliant. Operations had to stop. Water levels had to be reduced. And the structure had to be altered to restore the original flow path. No negotiation language. No delay clause. Just enforcement. The first breach happened early in the morning. Controlled cut through the sidewall, just enough to release pressure. Water began to move again, slowly at first, then steadily, finding the path it was always meant to follow. The reservoir started shrinking. Not dramatically, but visibly. Every hour, more of the valley returned. Edges of land reappearing where there had only been water. The same ground they said was integrated infrastructure. Now exposed again as private land. The lien didn't last much longer. Within a week, it was formally reversed. Filed correction. Public record updated. Balance cleared. All associated fees void. The $132,870 they had built their case around. Gone. Like it had never held authority in the first place. Then came the financial shift. Responsibility didn't disappear. It moved. Engineering reassessment. Restoration costs. Environmental correction. Survey revalidation. Every expense tied to the structure was reassigned, fully, to the HOA. Quietly at first. Then formally. The numbers were higher than anything they had tried to collect from me. And this time, there was no one else to pass it to. The board stopped sending letters. Stopped holding meetings. Stopped presenting anything at all. Because now, they weren't enforcing a system. They were answering to one. Administrative review followed. Internal. Then external. The president stepped down before it was finalized. Official reason, procedural oversight. Unofficially, it was collapse. The same board that had controlled the room now couldn't control the outcome. Contractors returned, but not to build. To undo. Sections of the dam were reduced. Flow channels reopened. Sediment cleared. Every adjustment guided by the same rule they ignored in the first place. Put it back where it belongs. I walked the ridge again a few days later. The waterline had dropped enough to expose most of the lower basin. Mud where there used to be still water. Grass flattened, but still there. Recovering. The marker stood fully visible now. Straight again. Exactly where it had always been. No longer hidden. No longer ignored. No longer something they could build over. The valley wasn't fully restored yet. But it was returning. On its own terms. And for the first time since I got back. There were no notices waiting. No letters. No numbers. No pressure. Just land. Quiet again. Because in the end, they didn't lose because I fought harder. They lost because they built something that couldn't legally stand. And once that was exposed, nothing they had written mattered anymore. The water was moving again, but what it revealed underneath was something they couldn't cover up a second time. A few weeks later, the valley looked familiar again. Not perfect, but right. The water had pulled back into its natural path, leaving behind dark soil and flattened grass that was already starting to rise again. The basin wasn't a reservoir anymore, just land doing what it had always done. Recovering quietly. I walked the boundary line at sunrise. Same route I'd walked years ago. Same markers. Same slopes. Only now, everything felt sharper. Clearer. The line they ignored was still there. And it hadn't moved. Up on the ridge, the neighborhood was quieter. No new notices. No meetings. No pressure dressed up as policy. Just distance. Procedural silence. The kind that comes after something breaks in a system, and everyone knows it. I stopped where the marker stood. Looked out over the valley one more time. Then turned back toward the road. Because the land didn't need defending anymore. It just needed to be left alone. And some lines don't disappear just because someone decides to ignore them.